Have you ever tried to save someone who didn't want to be saved? Not because they couldn't change, but because they chose not to. Think about that for a second. Have you ever warned someone and they laughed? Have you ever risked your time, your energy, your peace just to help someone who ignored everything you said? At first, it feels like kindness, like you're doing the right thing, like if you just try a little harder, they'll finally understand. But then something strange happens. They don't change. They repeat the same mistakes, the same patterns, the same chaos. And no matter how many times you pull them out, they walk right back in. That's the part no one talks about, because we like to believe we can help everyone, that if we care enough, if we try enough, we can save people. But what if that's not true? What if some people don't want saving? What if they're not drowning, but choosing the water? This is the story of a man who spent his life saving others until he realized something that changed everything. Because sometimes, the hardest truth to accept is this: you can't rescue someone who is in love with the thing destroying them. In a small riverside village where life moved quietly and nothing ever seemed urgent, there lived a boatman who was known by everyone but rarely noticed. He was not loud, not important, not someone people admired openly. But when the river began to rise, his name would always return in whispers, because he understood something the others didn't. The river looked calm, gentle, even. It curved through the village like it belonged there, like it was harmless. But the boatman knew better. He knew the river was patient, and it was hungry. Every year before the monsoon, he followed the same routine. He prepared his boat carefully, checking every rope, tightening every knot, making sure nothing would fail when the water turned violent. Then he would walk through the muddy streets, barefoot, knocking on doors one by one. "The river will rise this year," he would say. "Prepare." Some villagers nodded politely, not really listening. Some ignored him completely, and some laughed. To them, the river was just water, something they had seen all their lives, something they thought they understood. But the boatman never argued, because he knew something most people don't realize. Words don't change people, and when the water comes, only reality does. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The river stayed calm. The sky stayed clear. Life went on exactly as it always had. And that was the problem, because when nothing looks dangerous, people stop paying attention. The villagers continued their routines. They laughed, worked, talked, and ignored the quiet warnings that had been given. To them, the river was familiar, predictable, something they had lived beside their entire lives. They believed they understood it. And when you think you understand something, you stop respecting it. The young men were the worst of all. They gathered near the water, throwing stones, laughing loudly, daring each other to get closer. "The river is nothing," they said. "It's just water." And every time they said it, it became more real to them. That's how the illusion works. The more you repeat something, the more you believe it, even if it's wrong, even if it's dangerous. Meanwhile, the boatman watched. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't try to convince them anymore, because he had seen this before. People don't ignore danger because they're stupid. They ignore it because nothing bad has happened yet. And that yet is what traps them. Because when consequences are delayed, people feel safe. They confuse absence of pain with absence of risk. They believe they have control until the moment they don't. The days passed quietly, too quietly, and in that silence, something was building. Not visibly, not suddenly, but slowly, inevitably, because the river doesn't rush. It waits, and when it finally rises, it doesn't ask who's ready. The rain didn't arrive all at once. At first, it was soft, almost gentle. It tapped lightly on rooftops, as if giving the village one last chance to pay attention. But no one did. Life continued as usual. Conversations went on. Laughter filled the streets. The warnings had already faded into the background. Just another voice people chose not to remember. Then, slowly, everything changed. The rain grew heavier, the wind picked up, and the river began to rise. Not suddenly, not violently at first, but steadily, quietly, like something that had been waiting for this moment all along. The water crept past the banks, swallowing mud, then grass, then the edges of the village itself. By the time people noticed, it was already too late to prepare. The calm was gone. Now there was shouting, panic, confusion. The same people who laughed were now running, grabbing whatever they could, trying to hold on to things that were already being taken away. Fences disappeared beneath the water. Crops vanished. Animals struggled against the current. And above it all, the river kept moving cold, silent, unstoppable. And in the middle of that chaos, the boatman moved. Without hesitation, without fear, he untied his boat and pushed into the dark, rising water. Rain hit his face. The current pulled against him. The river that once looked harmless now showed its true nature. But he didn't stop. He rowed forward, toward the screams, toward the danger, toward the people who had ignored everything he tried to tell them. Because while others were realizing their mistake, he had already accepted it. And now, he was the only one ready for what came next. In the middle of the storm, when the river had already swallowed half the village and the night was filled with panic, the boatman heard a voice sharp, desperate, cutting through the rain. Without hesitation, he turned his boat toward it. The current was stronger now, pulling hard, trying to drag everything with it. The wind pushed against him. The rain blurred his vision. But he kept rowing. He didn't think. He didn't question. He simply moved toward the sound. There, barely visible in the darkness, was an old farmer clinging to a floating crate, his body shaking, his grip slipping with every wave. "I thought it wouldn't reach this far," the man cried, his voice breaking. The boatman said nothing. He reached out, grabbed him, and pulled him into the boat with steady hands. No anger, no judgment, just action. Then he turned and fought his way back through the violent water, each stroke of the oar heavy, each second harder than the last. By the time they reached the shore, the storm was still raging, but the man was safe. The next morning, the village was quiet again. The water had begun to settle. People gathered, whispering, pointing. They called him a hero. They thanked him. They praised him. But the boatman didn't smile. Because he had seen this before, he knew what would happen next. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon they would forget. And when they forgot, they would make the same mistake again. The next monsoon came, just like the one before. The same dark clouds gathered. The same heavy air settled over the village. The same warnings, ignored. But this time, something felt different. The boatman noticed it first. Near the riverbank, a group of young men stood laughing, drinking, throwing stones into the rising water like it was some kind of game. "The river is scared of us," one of them shouted. The others laughed louder. They had seen the floods before. They had been saved before. And somehow, that made them feel untouchable. That's the danger of being rescued too many times. You stop respecting the risk. You start believing nothing can happen to you. The rain began again, soft at first, then heavier, then relentless. The river rose faster this time, as if it had no patience left. Within hours, the calm was gone. The water surged through the village, tearing through anything that stood in its way. The laughter disappeared, replaced by panic, by screams, by the sound of people realizing, too late. The boatman didn't wait. He untied his boat and pushed into the chaos once more. The current was stronger now, the waves more violent, but he moved through it with the same steady focus, pulling people from the water one by one, those who were struggling, those who were afraid, those who suddenly understood the danger they had mocked. And then he saw them, the same young men, no laughter now, only fear, only desperation. He pulled them into the boat, one after another, their bodies shaking, their voices gone. But as soon as their feet touched dry land, they laughed again. And that's when something inside the boatman finally changed. That night stayed with him, not because of the storm, not because of the danger, but because of what happened after. The laughter, the same people who had just been pulled from the edge of death, laughing like nothing had happened, as if fear was temporary, as if consequences didn't last, as if being saved meant they didn't need to change. And that's when the boatman finally understood something he had been ignoring for years. It wasn't the river that was the problem. It was the people. He began to notice the pattern more clearly now. The same faces, the same behavior, the same cycle, repeating over and over again. They mocked the warnings, ignored the danger, and when the river came, they screamed for help. And every time, he answered. Every time, he risked his life to save them. But nothing changed because they didn't want to change. They didn't learn. They didn't grow. They simply survived and returned to the same chaos. He tried, one last time, to speak to them. Learn from this, he said quietly. You can survive, but only if you listen. They laughed. Some rolled their eyes. Some turned away. Some didn't even hear him. And in that moment, something inside him settled. Not anger, not frustration, clarity. Because he finally accepted a truth most people avoid. You cannot save someone who refuses to save themselves. And from that day on, he stopped trying to rescue everyone.